Thanks for having me. I'm Phil, and I'm working with the R&D department at L-Acoustics. So I'm part of a small team of about 12 researchers based in London, and there's many more of our colleagues based in France. This afternoon I'm going to try and convey to you a bit about ELISA, the technology itself, and also some of the research that underpins it, and our kind of, I guess, our approach to innovating in professional audio and trying to really understand and build on the state of the art. So what I'm hoping to cover, and we'll see how we get on, is in these sort of 6 parts. So first of all, I'll just explain a bit about L-Acoustics, who we are as a company. I had only come across L-Acoustics once or twice before I started working, so I think it would be probably a helpful introduction. And then some kind of dive into ELISA. So what is ELISA? The kind of step change in sound reinforcement from having a left-right type PA system to an immersive one. A bit about how you can use ELISA as a production tool. A little example of some research that we've done in our team and how it's transferred through to a product. And then I have some, I can introduce the active acoustics side of ELISA, which is what I'm working on more directly, and then sprinkle some future challenges for our discussion later. Okay, so about L-Acoustics, this is our mission statement, or one of them. It's to connect humans through the best shared sound experiences. Okay, so this conveys, I guess, two main things. So first of all is that it's obviously sound. We're a sound reinforcement company, but it's actually the connections between people that kind of drives what we do and the technology that we build. And really specifically in our context, it's about shared experiences. So like this is a shared experience. Going to a concert is a shared experience. Less so about consuming media like in your home. So we're really in this kind of audience-driven business. And we have products that can kind of find their home depending on the context in all sorts of different places where you could have a shared listening experience. So from theatres to festivals, concert halls, also hospitality, indoors, outdoors. So you can choose a product line of speakers and amps and technology that can sort of give you the best shared experience in that context. So L-Acoustics just turned 40 last year. And here's a kind of really brief overview of some of the milestones along the way. So the company was founded in 1984. And the kind of seminal product of L-Acoustics was the VDOS line array in 1992. So this was really for the first time L-Acoustics introducing these kind of curved sources that are now really common at festivals and concerts. I'll skip to the kind of recent years. So you can see here in 2016 was when ELISA was first launched, and I'll explain what that is. And then recently we've continued to kind of have some innovative products and solutions. So the L series is a kind of redesign of a line array. So instead of having like a K series traditional line array, you have lots of thin boxes and you string them together. That means that you have quite a lot of like physical box material in between your steps of your line array. And with the L series, we have a solution that's more kind of flexible because you have taller boxes, so there's less like wood in the middle of your speakers, right? So you can have a bit more like consistent line source. There's also some more integrated technologies that I won't cover today. But yes, just an impression of what's been happening over the last 40 years. And then I kept this slide in just mostly I could sort of give you a sense of the size of the company. So we're about 1,000 people, just over. And of the 1,000 people, I guess what's interesting for our audience is that about 20% of us are research and development. So that's across physical loudspeaker boxes, electronics, amplifiers, and DSP, and then software, which is like the software applications that you use to design with L-Acoustic systems, and also algorithms that sit on top of the loudspeakers and electronics. So ELISA is an example of software research. So all the algorithms that we build in our team in London kind of bring together the physical hardware of the L-Acoustics systems. Okay. So on the research side, we cover quite a few topics in our company, and I've just indicated like roughly which of our 3 R&D centres the work happens in. So we're headquartered in Marcoussis near Paris, and there's a sort of critical mass of people there. And in the UK, we own ELISA, which is to do with immersive audio processing, source processing. So there's research on cell field control, particularly like low frequency control in rooms. Also kind of how you maximize use of your calibration measurements to predict a whole sound field, this kind of thing. There's spatial audio, so how to make a sound sound like it's coming from a particular direction and the implications on the system design. And then there's all sorts of other topics around how to optimize all sorts of things, speaker designs, speaker layouts. There's the electroacoustic design and simulation of the physical speaker hardware. There's acoustic simulation, so understanding how speakers interact with rooms. There's amplifiers, active acoustics, which I mentioned today. Environmental noise control, so how our speakers influence the kind of macro region that they're in, especially for outdoor events. That's really important. Various topics around live sound perception, so we run plenty of listening tests and try and understand what is really the essence of like a good live sound experience. And then also deep learning in London and kind of working on binaural simulation of large-scale sound systems, which is not always as straightforward as you think it might be if you've done binaural simulation of small systems, because you start to get huge time delays, interactions of speakers with rooms and so forth, that makes it a bit more of a challenge. And just a kind of taste of the recent publications from the company. So I've just highlighted in bold the kind of overall topics. So there's things here about understanding room acoustics, things about source separation, so handling audio inputs and creating objects from them. Topics on audio networking, and then perceptual topics, which could be around, so groove fidelity is like if you have a big speaker system and there's some time delays just physically from the propagation of the source to the audience. Like when does it break? Like when do you not be able to kind of like dance anymore? Again, like time alignment, can we make sure that we're always time aligning in the best possible perceptual way between the main speakers and the subwoofers? And then some active acoustic specific topics around the amount of coloration that we can introduce in an active acoustic system. So I think that will make more sense later, but just to kind of give a snapshot of the kinds of work that we're doing. And I guess in a way also to kind of point you to some of the public facing stuff. Our philosophy is very much that by making some of our findings open, we hopefully support the whole evolution of the live industry. So we're trying not to be, or trying to find that balance between having technology that we can sell, but also in developing the technology, we're creating knowledge that is hopefully useful to kind of level up the whole industry. Okay. So let's go on a journey from left-right to immersive PA systems. So I'm sure if any of you have been to a concert, you've come across a large PA system with lots of speakers on each side of the stage, to the left and to the right. And it's been the way of things for quite a number of years now, so the curved sources are now really common, so you get this really nice like source coherence, even really far from the audience. Not far from the audience, far from the stage. You are the audience. But there are some limitations to this approach that we can kind of discuss. So if you're going to produce content in a large scale for this kind of thing, you have a mixing console. Many of you will be familiar with the kind of workflow, so the signal kind of comes in at the top nominally. I don't know if I can, yeah, there we go. So you kind of, it's really easy to think of your signal as coming through the mixing bus. I mean, in the old days it did literally go through with analog electronics, so you have some controls of whatever, equalization, compression or effects. And then spatially, you have a pan pot, and you're basically mixing a certain proportion of your sound into the left speaker and a certain proportion into the right speaker. But in a large-scale live performance, you have to be pretty careful with this because your speakers are typically not overlapping in terms of the part of audience that they're covering. What it means is that if you pan too much, if you pan yourself completely into one side, then actually half the audience can barely hear the sound that's in this speaker. So it's sort of stereo, but I call it left, right, and not stereo because typically it's what we call a dual mono. It's like you put almost the same thing in both speakers. And to illustrate that kind of speaker design, so here you have a kind of color-coded thing. So we have our left-right speakers, left and right. The color code here is about how shared the coverage is. So basically who can hear both speakers. So in the middle, the bright green, we have a region of the audience who can hear, perceive well from both speakers. Obviously, we need to perceive from multiple sources to do any kind of spatial rendering, otherwise you're just going to hear it from one. That's also known as the sweet spot. I mean, it's a kind of familiar term from kind of smaller scale listening, but it extends to large scale. So you'll get a kind of line through the center where everyone can understand well. And then the dark green, we have some cross coverage, but it's not necessarily helpful because we can, because of the path length, start to maybe perceive some like time offsets with things that should be synchronized and they become unsynchronized. And then the yellow here is where basically if you're in one of those zones, you hear either one speaker or the other. So you basically kind of have a mono experience. And in terms of localization, as I've kind of hinted at, it means that the people on the left-hand side of the audience are hearing predominantly all of the sound through the left speaker, and the people on the right-hand side are hearing it all from the right-hand speaker. It makes it more challenging than it needs to be for the brain to disambiguate the different sources that it's hearing. So there are some tools that we use. Obviously, really commonly, if there's kind of spectral overlap between sources, then you can equalize to kind of give a sense of separation in the available bandwidth. You can obviously mix with level. If there's different dynamics, you can use dynamics processing. So we already have some tried and tested tools in left-right mixing to make a show sound pretty good. But space is still important. So, typically on a stage, even one of this size, you have, space for your drummer at the back and your bass guitarist over to the left, and you'll have, I don't know, pianist here, unless it's Jamie Cullum, who'll be in the middle, and a singer at the front, maybe some backing singers, right? So there's some sort of spatial, even here we have like, what, a 5-meter stage. There's still some spatial variation. So it's something that we can potentially exploit in rendering to kind of ease that stream separation as well as to make the localization of the thing that we're kind of understanding to be part of the stream more natural. So yeah, this is to summarize the limitations. Basically, it makes it difficult or more difficult to separate the individual sounds from the mix. And also we can potentially have a situation where what we're seeing and what we're hearing are really not adding up. So with a more immersive system, basically we take away, or we don't take away, but we kind of move some of the like SPL production efficiency from just the left and right, and we spread it across the whole stage. So you end up with some very exciting looking speaker systems like this. And now instead of having a huge gap in between the speakers, we have some sort of filling in of the gap. So we have some opportunity with the speaker design to be able to deliver some sort of more natural experience. The system here in the Live Lab is kind of designed based on this principle. So it's obviously a small stage and sort of some coaxial boxes instead of these big arrays. But you basically have the same idea. So here there's actually 7 sources, but 5 is fine. So you could see the center 5. And we would mix in exactly the same way in here with a small ensemble as we would on a stage. And in terms of the processing, well, you have something that's quite similar. In a way, before you mix a master bus to stereo, you have an object of audio objects in the mixing console. So an audio object is just an audio channel. It's usually mono, but it doesn't have to be. And some metadata that it describe where that audio object should be in space. Can also describe non-spatial stuff, but for the sake of simplicity, we can talk about spatial. So it's like where in space is it? Where is it across? How high is it? How far from the audience is it? Or how deep into the stage? And also potentially a kind of width of the object or a spread. And yeah, as I said, in a sense, it can be thought of as a natural evolution of the data that we already have available on the mixing desk. So if you have all your audio inputs coming in channel by channel, kind of mix your levels, you can apply your processing, but you don't anymore have to collapse the result into 2 channels to render it out to the audience. And it means that instead of thinking about just kind of one mono type mix, you can start to position your sources in space, maybe in a way where there's performers, maybe in a way that corresponds to where the performers are on the stage. Obviously, if you have sort of like electronic music or something without a kind of grounded visual reference point, then you're even more free. And it means that you're basically solving these kind of limitations with the left-right system. So you make it easier for the brain to identify and separate all the sounds because they're coming from different positions in space. And also the sound is becoming more natural because it matches with what you can see. So I wanted to just demonstrate a little bit that. I'll show you the Elusive controller. This is what we're using to spatialize. And I am object 1 here. So this is obviously not the most exhilarating ELISA session that we've ever seen. But it's actually going to be quite helpful for just showing the basics. So here, I'm actually panned into the center speaker. I thought I was going to be panned here, but it was so close that it was a bit feedbacky. But I think the demo will still work. So, or maybe if I just stand behind the center speaker for a minute, hopefully I'm not out of shot. At the moment, you can see me here, and you can localize me from the center speaker. So hopefully that's quite a kind of coherent audio-visual experience. If I pop myself in more of a dual mono scenario, so I can just pop this one on. Okay, so this is how this talk would sound if you had a normal PA system where you just had a speaker on a pole on each side. And those of you particularly near the edges have hopefully noticed that I've moved. So you should all kind of hear me from over here. And on this side, you should hear me from the far side. And, you know, if you came into the room and the talk was like this, your brain would kind of get used to it. But like when you hear the difference, it's kind of stark, right? So that's just to kind of give an impression of that. So I'll go back to the middle, and hopefully that'll be a bit more comfortable. So this is pretty powerful effect. I've seen some shows in ELISA, and one of the most memorable that I saw was a band called Bon Iver. And they have a set where they quite frequently have 2 drummers or 2 sets of percussion. And it's really interesting to be able to kind of, you can really understand which drummer is playing which part of what would otherwise be a really complex kind of interacting like polyrhythm. Cool. So that's like the basics of why a kind of finer resolution of speakers is a helpful thing for a live show. In terms of how you build that up, so we kind of propose that you start the most basic level of immersive system with just a frontal system. So for that demo, I didn't need to use any of the high or surrounding speakers that you have in the Live Lab here. And it still hopefully brought a benefit to how you experience that. And it basically is designed to cover the width of the performing zone. And instead of putting the speakers so that they only really by design cover part of the audience, here we need the opposite to be true. So we need to make sure that all the speakers are covering all of the audience as much as possible. So we maximize that shared coverage, and that means that our spatial algorithms will still work. So if we're panning between speakers, then you'll have some experience that gives you that kind of spatialness. And the kind of limit of panning is that you'll perceive from one speaker or the next, but if there's a finer resolution of speakers, then your localization error is sort of from a portion of the stage instead of like from the whole other part. Cool. So then if you want to kind of level up your scene system, your frontal system, you can add speakers on the sides, so we call those extension, mainly because of the usage. So you might not typically put like really low frequency heavy elements over on the extensions, so you might be able to get away with a bit less hardware for that, but even sort of expand your spatial panorama. Obviously, adding subwoofers is helpful, and we've seen that typically having a central position of subwoofers, ideally flown, gives a really nice coherence between the subwoofer signal and the rest. So you can do a bit of quite like basic time alignment, and then everything's quite nice without too much kind of calibration effort, if you like. And then finally, also for a larger venue, you might want to consider a frontal system, like front fill system, or like an under balcony system if you need to kind of improve your coverage. But quite often in a large venue, your main speakers would miss the first few rows of the audience, so you have to have some speakers like on the stage front to cover them. And again, with Elisa, we have some spatial algorithms so that the people also in the first few rows that aren't being covered by the main speakers still get a sense of the space that is delivered by that approach. And then if you want to keep going with immersion like Live Lab do, then you can add surround and overhead speakers too. Basically that means that you can begin to move sound objects all around. And the kind of system design there depends very much on the resources. So quite often it will be lower powered speakers around the ceiling and around the back. And that works perfectly well if there's a stage and the kind of rear speakers are carrying mainly like reverb or kind of effects, a little bit of kind of interesting kind of seasoning on the content. We've also had some shows recently that have been more like dance based. So there was a festival in London organized by Polygon where they had line arrays all around, and then it gives you complete freedom because you're covering really well the whole audience from all different directions. Okay, so from a content production side then, I can explain a bit more about what Elisa can do. So the software that I showed briefly when I moved my voice was called Elisa Controller, and it's an object-based mixing tool for immersive events, installations and mixes, but of any scale, so it doesn't have to be a huge thing. People have used Elisa Controller or Elisa Studio to produce content that's been delivered as Dolby Atmos to Apple Store or whatever. So it's kind of heritage is in live sound, and some of the features are very much designed for preparing your live show, but as a creative tool, it also is a kind of quite interesting standalone resource. So yeah, you can create a natural, intelligible soundscape. You can immerse listeners, and as I've already described a little bit, you can define your objects in terms of pans. So where are they in 3D space? How wide are they? Maybe how deep or how far back? And how high? So this is like the core like part of immersive content production, right? Is putting sources around in space. And then there's a couple of things that I can tell you about that are helpful. So first one is that Elisa is actually free. So there's a software version of Elisa called Elisa Studio. It comes with two parts. There's Elisa Controller, which I just mentioned, the Elisa Processor, which is the bit that does the like algorithms. And you can run it for free from a Windows or Mac machine with 16 speaker outputs. So if you have a small studio, small production space or whatever, then you can give it a go. So it's free to download. And there's loads of really great YouTube like quick start videos for how to get going. And it's fully featured at Lisa, so the only limitation is the number of output speakers. Everything else is there, so you can have up to 96 objects, sources, and then all the other features that kind of make Elisa a fairly advanced like production tool, which I'll introduce in a second. Yeah, and for this, because you just have access to the 16 outputs, you can plug it through whatever speakers you like, so you don't have to buy our speakers for that. And in a kind of facility like Live Lab, where you have kind of smaller production rooms, but a main kind of Elisa space. So there's a hardware processor in this room because there's more channels, but you could very easily do some like show preparation, content preparation in the smaller studios, and then bring it into the big one for the event. And really, that's the goal, like the initial kind of conception of the software version, so you can kind of get a sense of what your show's like before you have to rent a space like Studio One to try. Okay, so a couple of other kind of noteworthy features of Elisa. So there's a room engine, and you're placing the audio objects in the shared space. So there's only one room engine setting per like controller session, but it's this kind of idea of placing, you know, all your things, so all your instruments, whatever voices, they sit in one like acoustic space. It's in 3D, and you have control of various parameters. So there's spectral, temporal, and obviously level. And it's a perceptual kind of driven room engine. So it's parametric. It's not convolving with any particular room impulse responses that we like. But it's building up in these sections. So there's some early reflections added, really kind of around the direction of the source quite tightly and very early in time. And there's cluster, which is a perceptual like early reflection engine based on a kind of nominal rim volume. So that spreads out and modifies the levels of those reflections. And then the late is more of a classical kind of decaying, diffuse, surrounding, kind of enveloping late thing. So it's used in Elisa, and then also it's the same room engine for the active acoustics that I'll mention a little bit later. And there's also the effects engine, which isn't audio effects, but it's like spatial effects. So we can apply some modulation and spatial modulation and different spatial behaviors. So we can basically automate a little bit some motion paths. It can be more or less kind of funky, be like continuous, whatever. And it means that for things like achieving this kind of motion, you don't necessarily have to have complex like automation lanes in your audio feeding, because we can kind of have that wrapped up in part of the Elisa sessions. So I'll show you a little bit, a couple of those things in just a second. There's plenty of effects available. And then just to say, if you need more than 16 outputs, then for kind of reasons of robustness, then we move to the hardware processor. So then it's exactly the same Elisa controller session, but you're then connecting to a dedicated processing engine, basically, that can handle everything that you need. All of the different subsystems that I mentioned and everything supported by the Elisa processor. Cool. So let's go back to our Elisa controller session. And I think what I'm going to do is just play some music on a loop, and then I can just demonstrate a little bit some of the kind of main ideas of moving, interacting with objects. Okay. You still hear my voice okay? No, okay, a little bit. So this is just some loop I found on the internet, right? It's not, the content is not for like, yeah, it's not part of it really. But so yeah, I can grab my source and I can, just in a very basic way, start to spatialize it. So I can move it around, all the way around. And then because we have a nice immersive system in here, we can also move it up and down. So I have quite a canvas spatially of places that I can put the source. And then I can also have some distance processing, so this should sound like it's going further away, which is not just level, it's also affecting like the frequency response of the object and the reverb. And talking of reverb, maybe let's add some. So this, I don't know how clear it comes across with this. It's also on my voice. So just a little bit of reverb there that hopefully nestles that, all those things in the same space. And it makes also the distance effect a bit extra powerful because you can kind of modulate a bit the amount of reverb that you get as if the source was far away. I can spread the source out because it's actually 2 channels. Whatever. And then I can show you some of those spatial behaviors. So what's this? An oscillator bouncing from side to side. It saves me doing quite so much clicking and dragging. And then I can move that whole thing around in space. So I'm layering effects on top of each other. And I think this one adds a random elevation. So you can quite quickly get to some quite interesting like bits of content with this. And that's going to distract me, so I'm just going to turn those effects back off. So obviously it's limited what we can do with just 1 or 2 objects, but you can hopefully imagine that if you start to layer different instruments, you can add some nice, really natural sounding reverbs and build in general some really quite nice content. Cool. So last topic on a LISA kind of spatial audio is a little case study on a product that's just recently been announced. It's going to be public in like a week or 2 when the LISA next version is released. And it's called the Immersive DJ. So in R&D in 2022, late 2022, we asked ourselves this question: is it even possible to do real-time, low latency audio source separation? So what we found is that source separation is starting to be used in audio production, but typically it's in a use case where it might be in a digital audio workstation where you can sort of process offline the files and then have your separated stems. Some of the results for that are amazing. Or it could also be doing that really fast, but adding some latency. So it can process audio in real time, but you might have to wait a second before we get the audio out again. So we wanted to basically have a go. So see if we could separate a stereo source. And the use case that emerged was for DJs. So typically a DJ might come to a club and they've got their decks and there's a stereo feed to the PA system. So we kind of know that we have this spatial tool that can create potentially some really amazing spatial experiences, but the content that the DJs have doesn't necessarily enable that. So it has to be both real time. So that means that the ELISA processor can only use the samples that it's just got. So yeah, we don't have that future context that you might get if you're in a digital audio workstation. You could have a look at the whole 3-minute project. And then also it has to be low latency because the DJ's there physically in the space with the monitoring system, and they have to be able to DJ in sync. So it also has to be super low latency. So in our team, my colleagues Fred and Satvik and Arthur mainly leading this, we really dived into the machine learning approach. So what data to find to train it on, and what kind of machine learning architecture to use. And then we also did plenty of listening tests in that work. And we ended up then in, I suppose, late 2023 with a paper that that Satvik wrote and published at ICASP on some sort of like fundamental ideas of real-time low latency source separation. You know, ICASP is like quite a well-renowned conference, so we were quite chuffed to get accepted. And it's done in a, you know, kind of naturally quite scientific way, so comparing against some state-of-the-art. And at that time, we found that the model that was proposed was performing as well as like an offline model from an DMUX from a couple of years before. So it was sort of comparable performance to an old model, not the brand new one, but the older one, but also super low latency real time. So I think the latency of this model was something like 30 milliseconds at the time. But I didn't double check that, so don't hold me to it. And so that was in September 2023, I guess, that paper would have been submitted. And it's taken the 18 months since to refine that technology and make it kind of product worthy. Plenty of optimization and jigging of bits and pieces to make it work, and also constrained by the existing ELISA processor 2 hardware that we have. And it was announced at the L-Acoustics keynote the other week, and I stole this animation because I think it's one of the coolest animations that I've seen for a while. So it just gives you the idea of the DJ giving a stereo feed to ELISA and getting 4 stems out. So the 4 stems that we separate are the drums, the bass, the vocal, and then everything else gets put into an other bucket. Cool, so I should have some time to demonstrate that at the end, but we can't do it during the live stream. So I'll move on for now. Okay, so the last topic is active acoustics. So part of ELISA, but also it touches kind of the whole ecosystem of L-Acoustics, from microphone processors to loudspeakers, and also rooms and services, but Ambience is an active acoustics solution. So why active acoustics? So the problem with room acoustics is that the best room acoustics isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. So it really depends on the content. So if you want speech to sound great, then you're going to want quite a dead, dry room acoustic. If you want a classical orchestra to sound great, and you put them in that dry room, then they won't sound great because the room will just consume all of the energy, and you won't get that sort of enveloping kind of long reverb tail. So you have here, as an example, this is an opera house on the right-hand side, and then a theatre on the left-hand side that's holding an opera, right? So in kind of practical situations, you don't necessarily have space in every kind of town for a theatre, an opera house, and a concert hall. So being able to kind of flexibly change the acoustics is potentially quite a helpful thing. So for that, we can use active acoustics. So basically, we're adding loudspeakers and microphones within the acoustic space, so that the microphones can hear, listen to what's going on in the space, process and feed some of that sound back to the speakers, and create, in the end, a sense of a larger room or more reverberant space than the room otherwise would sound. So there's a few kind of ways that Ambience connects, and basically in this graphic you can see, so we have like connection between musicians. So in a concert hall, you'll typically have a stage shell, so some reflectors over the stage, and it means that your musicians from side to side of the orchestra have some acoustic support from one of them making noise, gets reflected off the stage shell down to the other side, so that the musicians can hear each other well. If there's no stage shell, then it's potentially a thing that we can do with active acoustics by replicating those reflections electronically. But it also then means that we don't necessarily have to hang a stage shell all the time. And then there's the musicians to the audience. It's one of the most important parts of the whole experience, right? You want your orchestra to sound good in the room to the audience. So active acoustics can help that connection too. It's what I was mentioning about a room being maybe too dry for the kind of content that you're listening to. And then finally, actually, you can connect the audience with the audience. So there's a good example of this at the ABBA Arena in London, where ambience is deployed during some of the sections of the show where the audience are kind of encouraged to sing along. And it gives more of a sense of like a congregation, if you like. You can really feel like people are singing. But you turn it off during the kind of loud, bass-heavy like music, because the room would sound a bit wishy-washy in that scenario. Cool. So I've covered a bit of these, but yeah, so there's use cases for multi-purpose performing arts. I just like the pictures of these slides really, so I'm not going to dwell on them too long. Yeah, like academic institutions or rehearsal rooms specifically. Rehearsal rooms is a really interesting use case because in order to rehearse with a long RT and not be excessively loud with a physical room, you end up with a really large space, which obviously costs a lot of money in physical infrastructure. So if you can have an electroacoustic system in a smaller room, then you can potentially produce a kind of nice, pleasant reverb time, but without the loudness associated with it, which makes it a more enjoyable place to be for the orchestra, and it's better for the hearing. Home, I like this slide. It makes me smile because it doesn't look like my house. But this room is in our showroom in London. It's super highly acoustically treated. It's super dead. It's like 0.3 seconds RT. But it means that if you want to have a conversation in there, it's kind of challenging. You have to speak up. So we have ambience in there. And it means that this space is then really, like, it sounds amazing as like as a club. You know, it's loads of subs, super dry, it works really great. And then if you're having like more of a sort of social kind of mode of your room, then you can use active acoustics. You can imagine immersive spaces where there's some kind of interaction between people looking at something and feeling like they're there. And I added this slide just for you guys, because you can imagine also for virtual production that if you have some actors that are acting in front of a VP stage and they're supposed to be in a church or a large space like I don't know, a sports hall, then maybe it can help the acting if it sounds to the actors when they're speaking to each other like they're in that huge space. So it's potentially something that active acoustics can bring. Okay. So I can just share a little bit about the processing. Basically, as I've said, we put microphones in the room and speakers too, and around the stage. And then the processing consists of a kind of gain delay matrix, where we can just basically take the signal from a microphone and route it to one or more loudspeakers. And then the same room engine that I showed before, so we can add reverb to that signal. And it gives you a kind of canvas that you can paint with the room, but instead of just getting the reverb effect when you're talking to a mic, you can also get the reverb effect where you clap. And you know, when I added reverb to my voice earlier, that sounds quite nice. It sounds like I'm in a bigger space. But if you were to talk back to me, it would be weird then, because it wouldn't sound like you were in a bigger space. So there's two things going on. There's regeneration. So that's basically when you have the microphones and the speakers in the same room, then the speakers are feeding energy back to the microphones. So that's something that we need to take care with, because that's how you get unstable feedback. But if the feedback is stable and well managed, it gives you an acoustic regeneration. So you take the natural room acoustics that you start with, and you kind of extend it by feeding the signal back from the speaker back to the microphone. At the same time, if you have sources on stage, then maybe for certain parts of the room response, it's a good thing to have kind of more, in a way, traditional, like source to audience kind of reverb, and we can do that too. So ambience has these two things together. So there's a large and very capable gain delay matrix. There's the room engine, which has all the features that I've introduced before, so I don't need to spend too much time there. But I would just mention a couple of the technical challenges with ambience, because I think that's kind of interesting. So the first one, as I mentioned, is that you're exploiting feedback in ambience or in active acoustics. And if you push it too far, then it feeds back, and that's obviously always wrong. But before that, there's a kind of grey area where, as you increase the gain of the speaker of the microphones feeding to the speakers, you get towards feedback, and you can hear feedback coming. So then there's a question of how far should we push it, like how much coloration that process introduces is okay. So we realized we didn't really know, so we tried to find out. So we wrote an AS paper last year on this. So we simulated some different rooms. I can just show you what coloration can sound like. So this is the showroom. It's actually before it was refurbished, but it was dry then as well. So this is just the impulse response of the room. And then if you put the active acoustic system on with a gain of only 1 dB from being unstable, so basically much higher than we would usually push it, then it sounds like this. All the engineers in the room start to get really uncomfortable because it sounds like feedback. This was a simulation, by the way. We didn't actually drive the system to within 1 dB of instability. And then the larger room, kind of different coloured. So we're also interested in the relationship between the passive room acoustics there and the coloration. So we ran some listening tests, and we found a kind of threshold based on just these couple of use cases where the coloration was audible but not annoying. And we thought that somewhere around there is probably the optimal region. Then we're also able to compare it to an objective metric that we found in the literature and found a fairly good relationship. So it seems to be something that we can use maybe to predict the amount of annoyance due to the coloration in the room tuning. Another challenge in active acoustics is double sloping. So when you add reverb to the signals that you get from the microphone and feed them back into a speaker, the first part of what you hear is the natural room decaying. And then at some point when the reverb kicks in, you then hear the reverb. So you get slopes that look something like this, where you have some decay that's due to the natural room, and then you have some much longer decay later that's due to the reverb that you're adding. And if you push it too far, it can sound a bit unnatural. So our collaborator, PhD student, Will, ran some listening tests on naturalness. So how much could you basically extend the reverb time while it was still natural? So this on the x-axis here, if you're interested, is like the ratio between the natural space's reverb time and the reverb time in the loop. And it seems that if we have some kind of relatively, if we match the two, then the naturalness is basically the same as the system with the room with the system off. And then as we increase it, then we lose naturalness. So again, that's something that you can look up if it's of interest. Cool. I'm a little bit out of time, so I'll come into land with 2 case studies. First of all is the ABBA Arena that I already mentioned, and there's it's a huge room, it's massive, and therefore there's also a massive speaker system in there to cover it. And I'll just show you the preset. So this is the reverberation time with and without ambience. So the black line at the bottom you have with no active acoustics. And then we have just here a single preset, but modifying the overall reverberation time by changing the gain of that preset. So basically how much of the signal you're feeding from the microphone back to the speaker. And you can see that we can kind of modulate the RT by like more than half a second with that approach, depending on the gain that we set. And that gives something that the stage kind of technical management of the theatre can tune themselves. And then this is a theatre in the Czech Republic, so it's like a 500-seater near enough theatre. Again, pretty acoustically dead. So I'll show you just briefly the system. So there's an Elisa frontal system here. This is the front at the bottom. There's some height channels and surrounds. And again with here, so this is using a few different presets. So it's kind of pulling on all the different bits of parameters that we can do. So the dry room is around 1 second in the mid-range, and then the presets can take it up to 2 seconds. So it's quite a substantial variation. And I've just got time, I think, probably to play the audio. So it's a bit noisy because the impulse responses that I convolved were measured in noisy conditions. What I mean in a second. All right, so this is just how the room sounds by itself.
In language, infinitely many words can be written with a small set of letters.
With preset 2.
In language, infinitely many words can be written with a small set of letters.
Hopefully sounds a bit more reverberant. And then this is the most reverberant one.
In language, infinitely many words can be written with a small set of letters.
Cool. So we're able to achieve that variation in acoustics instantaneously just by a change of the ELISA room engine preset. And so it means it's really easy for the technical staff of the venue to be able to load in the right kind of acoustic conditions for the show that they have. Okay, okay, that's automated, it turns out. Cool. All right, so just to land, future challenges. So it's all very well to put speakers everywhere, but that means you have to buy lots of speakers. So it's really important in terms of the adoption of spatial sound by the sound reinforcement industry as a whole to have products that are giving you a lot of bang for your buck, or a lot of SPL per dollar, or whatever currency you like. So if a small box can deliver more SPL, that's good, because it means you can get more boxes onto your lorry. If you can rig your boxes as fast as possible, it's good, because it means that if you have a tour, it can make it feasible to do it in an immersive format. And obviously, if the cost of an immersive system is comparable or not substantially more than the left-right system that you would need, then that's also kind of lowering the barrier to be able to kind of make the most of that technology. So products like the L series from L-Acoustics kind of start to hit those boxes. So we can do a tour with L2, and compared to the comparable K series, it's going to use less CO2 because it's smaller, and it's also super fast to rig. So there was a demonstration that my colleague Scott did at the ISC in Barcelona, where during the demo he got audience members to rig the system. Like it just goes up so fast. Cool. We also have much more to understand about how the sound system and the rim interacts. So typically a PA system, a lot of projects is designed in free field. So you look at the free field coverage of the speakers, and in some complex projects, you might import it into a room simulation and kind of go further, but normally you wouldn't. So we're starting to be able to have space to assess and understand a bit more the influence of the room itself on the audience experience, and also the interactions between the sound system and the room. So hopefully in future we can have, I guess, better optimized systems or algorithms that can help help the speaker system sound great in different rooms. And then also in active acoustics, we'd love to make the tuning so fast that that we could sit in the venue with the conductor or the technical manager and basically play the room acoustics like you could if there wasn't a bunch of dangerous feedback happening. On the user experience side, obviously we've got production tools. We want to make those as useful as possible, and there's still a lot to learn about that. And also more general terms, the impact of our technology on performers and audiences. There's still a lot to know, especially when I was talking about things like stage support or like active acoustics where it interacts with musicians. Then there's a lot of evidence to gather to motivate these kinds of systems being kind of useful broadly. And then I've got a picture of Adele here. Adele did some residencies, and you could only see her if you went to Las Vegas. So it could be kind of cool in that kind of scenario to be able to cast the show to some other places globally. So like I said at the start, we're not necessarily interested in going into people's living rooms, but maybe somewhere else where there's an audience of Adele fans, maybe a live lab, maybe, because there's still a shared experience there, there's still an audience. So it's got us asking some questions that are super interesting, also with the teams here, about kind of what is the essence of a live experience? Like, is it okay to gather some Adele fans without Adele? And does that feel like an Adele show, or does it not? But does it still feel like a good thing to do, or does it not? So there's some really interesting questions that hopefully we can explore together. All right, that's only 2 minutes over. So thank you very much.